Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Go the Distance podcast series. My name is Sadie, and you can find my social media links at milehighradio.com/go-the-distance. Thank you to Lynn Burnett and Mile High Radio for making all of this possible. You can also check out my previous episodes at shows.pippa.io/go-the-distance. And today I will be interviewing and talking with my cousin Shelly. And so here she is. Hi, Shelly.
Hey, everybody.
How are you today?
Good, thanks.
Good. So welcome to the Go the Distance podcast.
I'm pretty excited to be here. You actually got to hang out with me at Christmas. I had no idea you had a podcast, and I've been wanting to, try that medium out forever. So this has been you and me just having all kinds of conversations, probably more than we have in the last 5 years.
Seriously.
Yeah, bonding over podcasting.
Who knew?
I know.
Well, I'm glad to be able to kind of introduce you into it and hopefully get you started.
Yep, I'll be interviewing you before you know it.
Excellent. The tables will turn.
Yep.
All right, so today we're going to talk about play, and not just play with children, but play as adults as well.
Yeah, so you and I that is something that we have in common, is a background with early education and working with young kids.
Mm-hmm.
I did, as it turned out, that was not my passion, was education with young kids. That was not the fit for me. I didn't love it. What I did love, however, was learning about the brain and learning about play. And as much as, I don't know, just like, and kind of realizing how much those two things were super, super related. And so I don't know, when we were chatting about what we should talk about for this podcast, that was kind of what I thought about, is just play and how good that is for you. And
I think it's so important, because as adults, we get caught up in the go, go, go of life, and we forget to have fun, and we become kind of miserable and like disconnected from that part of ourselves. And
yeah, and I think like one of the things about play that is super interesting for me is, like, as an adult, I almost always need to have a purpose for everything that I do, or I'm not motivated to do it.
mm-hmm.
Whereas little kids, it's just like the realm of just because.
Yeah.
Why did you stop and count how many spots are on that ladybug? It's just because.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if I'd be a little bit of a happier person if I did more things just because myself.
Just kind of go with what life gives you and enjoy the moment.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, like, just a big challenge that I always had was kind of advocating to families and to parents and other people about how important it was. And that can be a bit hard because it's just so intrinsic. Like it's just such an, like, it's just, the purpose is just to play and relax. And sometimes I think just the enjoyment and that was kind of hard to advocate for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think?
I just want to touch on what you said about being intrinsic. It's not something you can force. You just have to let it happen. When you're a kid and you have a play plan and you want to pretend that you're going shopping and your little sister is your baby, well, when your little sister doesn't want to be your baby, it's not very much fun, because you guys don't agree and you don't work together. Because probably, like, I remember, like, I would always want my little sister to be the baby, and then she would want to be the mom because I always made her be the baby. So of course she wanted to have a turn at being the mom. And so I think it's important that it is intrinsic and that it comes from within yourself and it's something true to you, and you need to be able to consider that for other people too.
I think, like, one of the most amazing stories about play that I ever heard actually had nothing to do with people. There were scientists and some researchers that were up in Churchill, Manitoba, and they were up there studying polar bears. And a team of dogs with them. And I don't know a thing about polar bears or dogs or the Arctic, to be honest, but the way it was explained to me is that they were camping up there. It was springtime. Polar bears were all hungry. Apparently they haven't had anything to eat, and they're really dangerous. So one evening, the male polar bear comes walking into the camp, and they don't have time to really untie the dogs. Like all the people just have to run and get into their cars as fast as they can. It's super dangerous, like the worst.
Wow.
Young adolescent male polar bear. He's skinny, he's hungry, and he goes straight for the dogs. And this one dog, who was also young adolescent male dog, apparently kind of a loose cannon, went running up to the polar bear. And this is almost where you need the photos, because the photos were just incredible. I'll see if I can find them for you. But he crouched down and started wagging his tails, like the universal gesture of, you want to play? And so they have all this footage of this polar bear and this dog goofing around playing in the snow.
Oh my goodness.
And it was incredible that these animals knew how to play with each other. They knew how to say, like, let's play. And everybody was just standing there like, this just saved our lives. The dog was the only one who knew what to do.
Yeah.
He's like, attack him. He's just like, let's play, bro, let's play.
Wow.
I really love that story, because that means that play, it is really deep in our brains. It must be. It's
yeah, because it's not just from our, human brain. It's something that all creatures participate in.
Exactly.
I don't know about all, but definitely other mammals, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. I thought that was really, really interesting. So it actually is really fundamental. It's about survival.
Huh. And to be able to, like, the dog was able to override the polar bear's need for food.
Exactly.
Like, intrinsic drive. He was able to, like,
play was literally more important than food.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. The other thing, I don't know if you remember learning anything about this, but I was also told that when you stop baby animals from playing, their brains are smaller.
Oh, interesting.
There is something really powerful going on with that.
Huh. And it's interesting, because in my education about early education, we learned about how play is fundamental to brain development.
Yeah, I guess that's why.
Yeah, because when you're just pretending things aren't really happening, but you're still creating those neural pathways in your brain.
It's I suppose it's just kind of like a dry run for a lot of different things. Like, for instance, I know, like, in a first aid class where they make you do the really awkward thing where you have to go pretend to do chest compressions on somebody or give them the Heimlich maneuver, and it's so uncomfortable. And you're like, what possible use could this be? But it's because the people running the first aid class know that if you practice even once and you ever find yourself in this situation, there is a better chance that you'll just, because many people who have had to do first aid on somebody have said something just took over and I didn't even know that I remembered it, but I just started doing it. It's because they get that one neural pathway even once, it can really change and make you more likely to do it, right? So I think all the things that we see with little children pretending to make food or pretending to care for smaller children, like they're doing that for a reason.
Yeah.
They're practicing.
Yeah. Creating those pathways so that when it becomes real as an adult, they are already set up for success.
Yep, for sure.
There's so much problem solving that happens with like pretend play, mostly with others. Like when you're, as a child, when you're playing with a peer, you're like, oh, well, this is a problem and now we have to talk about it and stop and think and figure out how we can both feel satisfied with what we want to do.
Yeah, for sure. It's like impulse. It's like controlling impulses, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really work. Like if you just, like you have to kind of plan it through, and there's what you want to do, but then she doesn't want to do it quite like that. And so the negotiation and everything.
Yeah.
Interesting as well. I think the other thing that really drew me to play is that in a lot of my work, I worked with children who had experienced extreme levels of trauma. And it was really, really interesting to see children turn to play as a strategy to cope and try to make sense of what was happening and to soothe themselves. I wasn't a play therapist or anything like that. But I think maybe a good example I can give you is of a little girl that I worked with whose little brother, when he was born, was very, very tiny and had to stay in the hospital for a long time. And so she recruited her little buddy Riley, and they were over in the housekeeping part of the play school, and they were playing with the babies. But in the story they were playing, the baby was really, really sick. And I watched that little girl do that for quite a few weeks. And it was all about the baby being in the hospital. And, you know, you could see that she was trying to figure that out. She was trying to understand what was happening. And even if her parents hadn't told me that the baby was getting better, I would have known, because after a few weeks, it started to be more about somebody had sent some flowers or the baby got a toy. So, you know, it was kind of resolving. It was really, really interesting to see how she patterned that, but it was dark for a while.
Yeah.
You know, she was trying to figure it out. And that's how she did it. She told us what was happening, but if I asked her, like, she wouldn't maybe have been able to tell me, but she played it right out. It was really, really interesting.
It's interesting, yeah, because children don't necessarily have the vocabulary to tell you, but they can show you through play.
Yeah, she knew exactly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting too, because if anyone thought that little kid she didn't really understand, or she wasn't picking up, well, she maybe would have been able to tell you about it, but she knew.
Yeah. Inside of herself, intrinsically.
Yeah, totally. It was pretty neat.
I don't know how I feel about this, but I saw a video of a little girl. She was probably like 9 or 10 years old, and she had a baby doll, and she was just like slapping it and hitting it and like smashing it. And her brother was just kind of like, or somebody was like sneaking in and videotaping, and she didn't really know. And I was just like, wow, like that's the impact we can have on children. And I never treated my dolls that way. I always like took good care of them, and you know, just makes me wonder like how can people just continue to be that way when it's so obvious how we're influencing our younger generations.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what, I think what you're touching on there is that play does have a dark side for sure. And although I wasn't a play therapist, I worked with play therapists for many years, and to be in a play therapy room is pretty interesting. Like, for instance, they have what you would call monsters in there. Like there's great big dinosaurs or really, really scary looking creatures. There's even guns and handcuffs. Yes, that's because children have, in some situations, seen things.
Mm-hmm.
Guns and handcuffs, or else they need that to be a part of their play. So one play therapist told me that the little boy he was working with would come in and put the handcuffs on him, and just like not want him to play with him, not really want him to participate, right? That kind of seemed like there was something kind of symbolic going on there too, where I just want to do this myself, and this is how I can make you stay out of the way. Really, really interesting. But I mean, to go to a play therapy, it's not a play therapy room. It's not just happiness and dolls and housekeeping. There's other stuff there too.
Yeah.
And violence, aggression is part of it.
I worked with a little boy, and every time we'd go into the one room to play, he would put me in handcuffs and put me in jail. And then he would want to get buried in the lava, and he would say like, no, I don't want to live anymore. And he's like 8 or 9 years old, and I want to die. I want to go get buried by lava and burn alive. And I had to like, I was in my mind, I was like, okay, so this is already a pathway for him to lead to suicidal thoughts, and he's not even 10 years old yet. So I was like trying to find ways to make like that burning lava man become somebody different. So I was like, oh my goodness, you've emerged from the lava, you're now lava man, and you're going to save the world. And I don't know, I didn't work with him for very long, but when we played other games, it was like he was always angry and always like yelling at somebody. I set up like a little road and like a little town, and we'd have to get to the different stores and buy things, and he was always like rah, 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 at the customer or whatever. And it was just
wow. Yeah,
so interesting to see how their little brains develop. And
well, and for that matter, like there's like the sad and dark and serious side of it for sure, and then there's some of the kids that I've worked with over the years, and you know those car mats that you put them on the floor and you can just drive. It looks like a little town, but you can drive the cars around on.
Yeah.
This kid, he would sit down there and he'd play with his, and he'd be driving his little car all over the map, but he was just like a maniac. And you could totally tell that somebody had modeled this for him, because he'd be like, "Get out of the way, you jerk!" His parents would come pick him up, and they seemed like the sweetest people. But we were like, well, look at him somewhere.
Somebody drives a little.
Yeah, somebody's a little extreme.
Someone's got a bit of road rage.
Yeah, there are parts of it that were pretty fun as well.
Another little girl I worked with. Well, I didn't actually work with her, but she was kind of around while I was working, and she would always go like this, "I'm Sky."
She had
And
the
she just like posed like that for like 2 minutes, and she just like,
It can be pretty theatrical.
oh, I know, it's so funny.
I remember working with a child who was the queen of the housekeeping area. She was the mom, and everybody else did what she said. And boy, she had an iron fist. That 4-year-old was more organized than I am. There was one child who wanted very much to be the little puppy, and like all the other kids seemed pretty enchanted with her. But I walked over one day and said, "Naya, this place is a mess." And she turns around and she looks at me and she goes, "It's because of that darn dog." I laughed. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty interesting to watch them going through that and playing through it.
There's always that one person who's super dominant.
Yep, that's right. She was in charge.
Yeah.
It was her game, but it still wasn't really working out for her, that darn dog.
It's kind of interesting. When I was doing my EC, we studied this little boy through some videos that he was recorded in, and he would always dress up and be a little girl or like a mom with a dress and a purse and high heels. And we just talked about how like we could have like judged him and said like, oh, he's like, playing with his gender roles and these kinds of things, but it turns out that he is a child of a single mom.
Oh yeah.
That's the role that he knows, and that's the role that he sees. And we could have easily put on him like, oh, maybe he's like has like homosexual tendencies, or maybe he's like wants to be a girl or something like that. But really, he's just acting out what he knows. And if we put those expectations or those thoughts on to that child, that we might be steering their future in a way that is new and true for them. We're just making assumptions based on our observations.
Oh, totally. Like we had experienced this too, where you can jump to conclusions way too fast. My boss was working with a child in a play therapy environment, and this little girl, what she would do is she'd come in and she'd line up all the dollies, and then she'd feel around under their dresses and under their skirts.
Oh,
and I know exactly what you're thinking, because it's what everybody thinks. Like, oh my gosh, like what has happened to this kid? So my boss spoke to her mom and just mentioned that this was happening. And it turns out this little girl's mom really liked to watch those baby story shows.
oh, okay.
The baby is born. So she was catching babies.
Oh, okay.
And she just was really interested in that, and was so that was really interesting thing too. Is like, whoa, you got slow down. Like, this kind of looks like something's happening, but what is she really showing you?
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
And yeah, because the child's just usually playing and not really verbalizing what they're doing. Like they might be saying like little things within the play, but they're not explaining themselves and saying like, this is what I'm doing. It's easy.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting how assumptions can happen and how quickly we can draw to a conclusion that might not even be true.
Yep. And I guess kind of like thinking about all of this, kind of what it makes me wonder, like if I were a parent listening, like what would be my takeaways from this? But if I were just a person listening, like I keep thinking about what are the takeaways about play that matter to adults?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's important for us about this? Because I just keep hearing so much about mindfulness and meditation, and how it's super important for us to do too. But that's kind of making me wonder about that being in the moment, and just really focusing on what you're doing and doing it because you enjoy it, not because somebody else thinks it's cool. Just being expressive in a really interesting way. And so I keep thinking about whether it's got value for adults as well.
I think it does, because I mean the ideals around how we define play change when you become an adult. You don't sit and play with dolls or cars or these kinds of things as an adult, but Lots of people play with art and music and just like creating things. Like someone who's maybe like a woodworker, they play with their wood and they create whatever it is they're creating. And I think
Total plethora of adult coloring books too. Have you noticed that? Like they're all over the place.
it's true. I
Like,
love
there
that.
is like something is missing for people right now.
Yeah. I think what's missing is just like getting into an activity and not being aware of time or outside parameters, or the fact that you have a pile of dishes to do, or an assignment that you need to get finished for work, or whatever it is. I think we're just constantly like stimulating onto the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. We don't ever get immersed in what we're doing and just kind of like lose track of time and just
It's the bubble, right? It's like you can see little kids who are really enjoying what they're doing. They don't know what time it is or what's going on. They've completely lost track of the time, that really, really good feeling. That's just like a protective bubble. And even
yeah,
if they're really sad about something or they're so stressed about something that's going on in their lives, it seems like most of them do find refuge in this other world.
yeah.
And you know, like they can do that. They can access it.
And like even for that kid who's in that world, like someone could be sitting right beside them and having a conversation about something, and they don't even hear it. Like they're just so zoned in that they're just like completely undistracted and completely unaffected by what's going on around them. And I think a part of that has to come from feeling safe too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's the biggest part of it, right? Because I think there's physical safety, which we think about all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but there's emotional safety too.
Yeah,
And the environment is a really big part of that, and the people in the environment are a really big part of that.
for
Like
sure.
being able to drop in and focus is really matters too. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if like that's a takeaway too for adults about just like feeling safe enough to play.
Yeah,
So that would mean that you'd have to be, yeah, physically safe, but like emotionally safe as well.
yeah. Like if you feel like you're being judged negatively for what you're doing, then chances are you're going to feel reserved about doing it.
Yeah, and I think as adults, like for me, when I think about trying to be uninhibited, the biggest, most judgmental person in the room is usually myself too,
Mm-hmm.
with all kinds of helpful things to say about how I'm doing it wrong or not like that or not like the other person. And
Or this isn't perfect, so it's not good enough.
yeah, that's right.
I get stuck on that a lot. I'm like, oh no, I did this one tiny little thing wrong, so this whole thing's ruined.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that kind of means it's not intrinsic, right? It's just
Yeah.
like it starts getting really, really goal oriented instead of just enjoying the process. And I don't know. I as a child, I never had this evaluation for myself that my art needed to be featured in a magazine or that somebody needed to do a podcast with me about it. I just made it because I liked it. And some of it went on the fridge and some of it just got recycled and that was okay too. But it was just the pleasure and the joy about making that and feeling so calm. And these days it's amazing how brave I have to be to sit down with some pencils and draw something.
Yeah. It takes a lot for me to get into that headspace now.
Where the judgment just stops and
Yeah.
yeah.
And not even just the judgment, where the distraction, like sometimes I sit down to work on an art project and then I'm like, oh, well, actually, I have a whole thing of dishes to do and I need to do my laundry. So I'm going to do this for like 3 seconds. And now I'm going to get distracted and go off and do all these other things.
Well, it's really interesting you said that because when you were talking earlier, I think what you were really touching on is how important focus is for play and like just kind of getting sucked into that world. And when you said that, like I was wanting to bounce off you. What are your thoughts about like this digital world for young children and of course like by extension for us as well? Because that distractibility thing, it's never been easier. There's a distraction from a distraction from a distraction.
Can you ask your question again? Because you kind of cut out.
Oh, sorry about that. No, what I was kind of getting at is just about the idea about when you were talking about how focus is so important and it's a big part of play. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about digital play,
Okay.
and the digital world, not just for kids but for adults as well, and whether you think it's like beneficial and helping us, or if it is distracting us too much, so it's getting harder to play.
I think it depends on what you're playing, because there's these games that you can play that you just literally sit there and you're just like click, 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 click. I'm not really doing anything but moving my finger. And there's games that you can play that actually involve thinking and planning and strategizing. And I think that those kinds of games are helpful, but I think they're I think they're easy to focus on and they're easy to get kind of sucked into the world of. But I think that can also become the problem because you get so involved in that world that you forget about your outside responsibilities as well.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's kind of, like, we're wondering now, like, if for babies, an apple is more like a phone than it is an apple, like the fruit that they put in their mouth and gum on and make a 3D reconstruction of the world, right? If if that has implications for them, and it might or might not, and we're just learning about that. But what I wonder about is what the implications are for me,
Mm,
because I used to be somebody who could just drop into a book and just read and read and read and just be so focused on one thing. And I notice in myself, my attention span is so different.
me too.
I kind of miss the old way.
I know. I long for it, but it's so hard when there's so much pressure to complete certain things and to get things done for like I said, those like outside responsibilities.
Totally. And I don't think the new way is bad.
No.
It's just miss some of the old things. It's
Yeah.
like an old skill I used to have.
You gotta learn how to get it back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure play is kind of like the gym. Like any muscle can be strengthened.
Yeah.
You have to do it more.
Yeah. And your brain is, I don't know if it's a muscle, but I don't know what it's made of, but you have to keep your brain, in check and active, and you have to use it or you lose it.
Yep.
So I think it's really important to find that time to just immerse yourself into something, whether it's going for a hike or going to a sports activity or doing art or baking or whatever it might be. It's so important to have that time where you're just kind of in your own little bubble and not worrying about so many other things.
Yeah, and something that you just said that I think is kind of interesting, like everything you just listed there is a sensory activity.
Yeah,
And
that's
we
true.
talk about that for like infants and little kids all the time. But I think for adults too, the more of your senses you're using, the easier it is to be present.
I agree.
Where I think a lot of technology is just mostly visual.
That's true.
So maybe stuff where you're using more than one sense, that's like the more beneficial activities for your brain.
Yeah. And I think too, like, there's something to be said for muscle memory because, like, you're using your body to perform a task that you've performed several times before. So now it's becoming more easy and becoming in your muscle memory, but you have to be able to train your brain to do that. But if you're just doing little things with, on video, like on a game, you're not really using your body. You're just using your mind and your eyes.
Well, I mean, something that I've been talking to people about, and I just wouldn't mind your thoughts on this either, but many different, like for example, I work at a library now, and something we talk about a lot is how to get people to come out for programs. And the big thing that everybody is saying is that what happens is people use their automatic garage door opener to get out of their garage, they drive to work, they use their automatic garage door opener to drive back into the garage, they park, they don't ever say hi to their neighbors, they don't see them, and they don't want to come for programs. And I think partly like people could say, well, this is just communities breaking down and this is just horrible. But I wonder about something else. I wonder, like, there's a sweet spot for stimulation, and I think our culture has reached it. Everybody is just so busy these days. I am in that category as well. And so I completely understand that people are overstimulated and they come home and they just cannot do any more stimulation. And I know that when I'm so tired and my brain is so overwhelmed, it's kind of almost like coping to just go and use a phone or a device or something where there's a predicament. Whereas, like, maybe it would be a little bit more beneficial to reach out to a friend or, call somebody in my family or whatever. But like interactions with people, you don't get a predictable response with people all the time, right? Like I could call you and I've had a tough day and I want to feel better, but I call you up and I'm already feeling bad, and turns out you had an even worse day than I did. So now I need to set my feelings aside and listen to you. So I totally understand why people are kind of drawn to things like computers or games where it's just more predictable responses, and yet I'm wondering if that's kind of contributing to overstimulation too.
I think it definitely is. I mean, I read a fact that like every time you learn something new, every time you like put a new piece of information into your brain, it stimulates you and it gives you this high, like a little bit of a high, because there's a chemical release in your body when you learn something new. So I feel like too, like when people just veg out on like the same old TV show that they always watch, it's kind of, or go to that game that they always play, then they're not maybe stimming in the same kind of way, but they're stimming like something that's comfortable and something that they're used to and something that they can mellow out to, as opposed to trying to problem solve or think your way through how to talk to this person about this problem that you're having.
Totally, because I think maybe like what I think I'm hearing a little bit is that maybe some of the ways to play that are technology, it doesn't mean that they're horrible or bad, but it's almost more like they're coping
Mm-hmm.
things. Or almost, I would almost say the word numbing
Yeah.
too. It's not that they make you feel good, it's that they make you feel nothing.
Yeah. And that's sort of in line with like people who turn to drugs and alcohol for that same type of thing, because they just don't want to have to deal with the reality that they feel stuck in or that they're a part of.
Yeah, like I'm assuming drugs and alcohol for the most part, if when they're abused, actually don't make people feel great. But maybe they make you feel nothing, and maybe that's better than feeling just horrible or overwhelmed or stressed or scared.
Mm-hmm.
I get that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like I just can't. I read this hilarious thing that was written 3,000 years ago in ancient Greece by a man. He was on a rant because of the sundial. He's like, when I was a kid, we didn't have the stupid technology. When we were hungry, our little tummies told us and we just went and ate. And now everybody's doing things by this darn sundial. He just thought it was awful. So I just refuse to get, I don't want to be that person who's just horrified and thinks the technology is horrible and it's nothing but bad and just sees the bad parts of it. Because on the other hand, it's also incredible.
It is.
But
I can, with a click of the button, talk to you who's, however long.
thousands of miles away, I know. It's real.
No,
I'm so sorry about that.
that's okay.
That was it's
Just so you know, we only have a couple more minutes.
no problem. And Line's gonna have to fix that anyway.
Yeah,
Like 5-minute warning.
that's okay. She might just, I don't know. I'll watch it and see if it's that bad.
Okay.
I was like,
Awesome.
no, so maybe
No, we were doing so good.
yeah. Now I kind of forget what you were saying though.
No, it must not have been that important. Just like technology isn't a bad thing. It's like it can be a part of it, but I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced it's this pure play. I don't think it uses as enough senses to be pure play.
Yeah, I agree. I'm some things, some games are working towards like where you have like five people and you have chat and you talk to each other about what you're doing and that kind of thing. And I think that's a little bit more in line with play, but I think it's still, I think actual personal connections and personal, like where you actually physically get together with someone, you actually see that person and you're with that person. I think there's value to that too.
Yeah, that's not replaceable.
No.
That uses a lot more senses, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. So do you have
Oh,
anything that you want to kind of end off with?
no, I think that's good. It was just kind of something I wanted to. I just pitched it to you, and you're like, okay, so you just run with it.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, we should definitely do this again.
Yes, agreed. You're going to be on my show,
Okay.
and we'll probably kind of like build on this whole conversation because I do think it's really interesting.
I like it.
Awesome.
All right. So thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to go the distance because life doesn't stand still. And you can check out this episode and all of my previous episodes at shows.pippa.io/go the distance. Oh, go dash the dash distance. I apologize. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode.
Woo! Bye.